President Obama accepted the Democratic nomination for president last night for a second term, a roaring crowd screaming 4 more years. But what did political analysts have to say, not just about the president's speech, but the Democratic National Convention as a whole? Joining me this morning, a faithful here at Watchbox, Bob Oldendick, political analyst from USC. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. First, let's just get into it. It's the morning after the president accepted the nomination and gave his speech. What do you think the feeling is amongst Democrats right now?
Well, I think the Democrats are really feeling pretty good about themselves this morning. They had, for this week, a pretty remarkable convention. The speeches, both Tuesday night and Wednesday night, and the president's acceptance speech, all pretty much laid out a theme and showed them that this is, while we may not be where we want to be yet, this is where we want to go. Let us finish the job, and the 4 more years theme, and everything was really very well done. So I think that they're in pretty good shape as of this morning.
Now, you mentioned the president saying, let us finish the job. He's been criticized this week about giving himself a grade of incomplete. Do you think that's hurting him? What does him saying that about himself mean?
I think it's a matter of perspective on that. One say if you're in school when you get an incomplete grade, that's not good. But if you look at it in terms of wanting 4 more years and say, well, I've got an incomplete because I haven't had time to implement and all the policies that we put in place to take effect yet, incomplete can be seen in a more positive light and say, that's one of the reasons you should let me finish the job and not stop the momentum that we've got to this point and go to 180 degrees different policies. Let's give these an opportunity to really take hold.
Now, we heard from Biden, we heard from the First Lady, and Clinton. A lot of people giving a lot of kudos to Clinton, saying that he really came out strong and made a case for the president. Do you think he's still a more popular president than Obama?
Well, Clinton's approval ratings are much higher than Obama's at this point. I think they came out last week. He's at about 69%. And his speech, if you kind of objectively look at did they achieve their purpose and did they fire up the crowd, I think that Clinton's speech this week was really the best. Obama's speech last night was adequate. I mean, it was a good speech, but given the bar that had been set, given his wife's speech on Tuesday night and Clinton's speech on Wednesday, he really had to, really knock it out of the park. And I don't think that he rose to that level last night.
Now, Obama criticized, a lot of speeches from the RNC, saying that they didn't really lay out a plan. Do you think his speech last night laid out a plan from the Dem side?
There were not a lot of specifics, and there were not a lot of new proposals that he laid out last night. He talked about some of the contrasts, some of the differences between the general approach that he would take as opposed to the way the Romney-Ryan ticket would do them. But in terms of specifics, this is really what we're going to do, that was not there in the speech last night.
Gotcha. Now, earlier this week, there was a strong Republican presence at the DNC as well. Governor Haley showing up. A lot of Democrats here in South Carolina, especially Dick Harpootlian, criticizing her, say, hey, you need to be back here in South Carolina dealing with South Carolina issues. Do you think that Republican presence shook anything up for the DNC?
I do not. I don't think it made much of a difference. It got attention here in Columbia because it was our governor, because of her presence last week at the Republican convention. But in terms of did it make a difference in the convention and did it get play really outside of this area, people really did not pay that much of attention to it. The things that were going on inside the convention hall and the speeches that dominated each of the 3 nights really got much more attention. So it didn't really make that much difference. It was not that effective.
Any big hits for you or misses from the DNC? Anything you thought that they did really, really well, or anything you thought they did really, really bad?
I think the big thing coming out of this was in most elections where we have an incumbent president, it's really a election that says, how do we do? Are we better off than we were 4 years ago? I think what they were able to do, particularly with President Clinton's speech, was kind of change that dynamic a little bit and say, not just looking at the economic numbers now, because historically we know no president's been reelected with an unemployment rate as high as it's going to be.
Correct.
But by saying, look, this is the hole we had when we took office, even Clinton saying, even I couldn't have dug us out of this hole. We need more time to do this. Kind of changes that dynamic a little bit and makes it less of a referendum on Obama's 4 years in office and more of a choice election. And I think that by being able to change that dynamic, by changing the framing of what the big issues will be throughout the campaign, will take us over the next 8 weeks and kind of give us that choice.